Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Parallel Universe. I'm Suzanne Mataboni from Parallel, and I'm joined by my co-host, John Stafford, also from Parallel. Hi, John.
Hi.
Well, at the Parallel Universe, unique insights and perspectives are the order of the day. So we're looking forward to a candid conversation about one of the more controversial topics out there in the technology sector, 5G. Why is it important? Where is it going? Is it hype or not hype? And joining us today for some opinions on that are two of the most respected executives in this sector. That is James Brehm from James Brehm and Associates. He's the founder and chief technology evangelist, and that's one of the most influential consultancies in the IoT and wireless sectors. Hi, James.
Hi.
And we also have Alan Proithis, who is Chief Executive Officer at Capstone Partners. That firm counsels technology providers looking to capitalize on 5G and IoT opportunities.
Well, hello, everyone.
Yes, welcome. Okay, so to get things going, we start our parallel universe with 5 essential questions. So our first question, we know that 5G provides increased bandwidth in wireless environments. So is there really a need for this technology? What's the level out there? James, did you want to start?
Well, to me, 5G is a lot more than that. 5G does some really unique things. First of all, if we're talking about in a carrier environment, it's going to reduce the cost of operational expenditures by carriers, and you know, it's reutilizing some of the great stuff that was in 4G LTE, but quite frankly, 4G LTE was premature when it was launched, and this will reduce some of those costs. It'll make it easier to operate, and there are new technologies being brought in that will allow it to handle network slicing and things like that to ensure better quality of service. Alan?
Yeah, and I agree with James is saying, and I would add 1 or 2 things. So one is it was really necessary with the government because they raised how many tens or hundreds of billions in the auctions. But 2, in addition to what James said about the extended capability set, and I would actually argue every new generation of network is actually a little ahead of its time to you know, make it work and scale and all those things. But I think it's what I see going on is it's a very powerful thing to be able to put a network where you want it, okay? And to allocate the network resources the way you need to for the use cases you're trying to address. And so I think there's absolutely correct what James said from my point of view of the network efficiencies and the cost savings. But then on the private network side, it's a very powerful thing. I give the analogy of sort of because people try to say, what's private network 5G or LTE? Well, when you buy a Wi-Fi router, you don't buy spectrum to use Wi-Fi at your house or office, right? There's shared spectrum allocated to use that as long as everyone plays by the rules. And the same exact thing is happening now with the CBRS bands in 5G. And frankly, I think you'll see just a very exciting combination of private and public rolling out.
John, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I agree that certainly, you know, 5G is much more than bandwidth, but it's also very early. You know, I saw the 5G icon pop up on my phone recently, and there was no discernible difference in what might be happening in terms of, you know, how I use my phone, and I think that maybe we're not quite at the sort of the aha moments either in the enterprise or as individuals of this is why I need 5G. You know, this is what's driving beyond the just normal migration of, you know, from one generation to the next.
You know, John,
okay.
John, you said something interesting to me there. You use the word phone, right? And 5G isn't just about the handset, right? And when I think about 5G, it's kind of a pyramid or a triangle of speed, which you're going to take advantage of with your phone or with an iPad, things like that. It's ultra low latency that other things can take advantage of, say autonomous vehicles, first responder communication, machine technology, robots, autonomous things in factories. And then fundamentally, this is the first time any of these new technologies have rolled out where we're also talking about slower speeds and reduced energy consumption, right? So the foundation is massive things that don't put out a lot of bandwidth, that have low power needs. And that's, so to me, it's built on those structures, and asset tracking, tagging, things like that, where we're talking about billions, if not trillions of things that could be connected. We're finally talking about those.
Okay, so one of you mentioned the investments that were being made on, say, on behalf of the carriers. Is there any concern about recouping the investments and how long it's going to take, considering the speed of the rollout or anything of that nature?
So this is where James and I probably have an interesting sparks will fly. From my perspective, of course, long term it makes sense because of the operational savings and the potential increase in revenue. But if you look at some of the financial analysts' work that's been done on this, and you look at the amount that's been spent on not just the CBRS auctions, but the 280 megahertz of traditional licensed spectrum auctions, plus some other things, the big tier one telcos in the US are actually incredibly cash constrained right now. And we've seen them selling off pieces. Everybody is trying to generate cash, except for I think T-Mobile Sprint is actually probably in the best financial shape, according to pure financial analysts. So it definitely does pay off, or they wouldn't do it. But I think you're going to see different ways they can now invest the billions to build a network after investing tens of billions to have the right to build a network.
Okay, James, counter?
I don't think the selling of pieces that Verizon is exploring now and AT&T has undergone has anything to do with the spectrum auction. I think it actually has to do with right sizing and right tuning their companies into what they should be doing. Maybe they overbought. I mean, for crying out loud, who needs to own AOL or the Huffington Post anymore, right? Aren't there newer things than that?
More CDs in the mail from AOL. I missed those. Use them to scare the birds away in the garden.
So,
I remember those.
They're able to utilize that to recoup this. But I agree with Alan that the spectrum auctions that have happened are generating a ton of money, and probably the value of spectrum is probably way too high right now anyway. But as long as they can do it, as long as they can raise additional cash, they can throw a bond out there, they can raise additional stock, they're going to do it. They're going to chase this thing. But because it keeps all the smaller competitors out of the space too, right? The new guys.
Okay.
I think that's one of those issues. And when I think about CapEx, and the CapEx spending that's going on to do this, let's roll this thing back the last 20 years, 15 years in a row. We had AT&T and Verizon as the number one and number two CapEx spenders in the world. 15 years in a row, AT&T and Verizon were either in the number one or number two place. I mean, it's normal for them. I can't, it's not normal for my checkbook to balance things like that. But these guys it seems to be normalcy for them to write checks that you think that they will never, ever be able to pay back. And then they seem to be able to do it.
Well, it's the ultimate recurring revenue business, right?
Yeah.
John, I see you nodding also.
Yeah. So, I guess the one thing I wonder is, obviously there's a time to recover, but is there going to be, as they build this out, is there going to be an issue with carrying forward 2G, 3G, 4G, that infrastructure, or can they, lop off those CapEx costs and just look forward?
Well, Verizon's already started shutting down its 2G network in places. AT&T's killed it a couple of years ago. There's dates on T-Mobile and Sprint and what's happening there. The integration of the merger is causing some pushback on that stuff. There's a timeline on the 3G stuff from both Verizon and AT&T. Yeah, COVID pushed it back a little bit for Verizon. AT&T is still holding on 2/2/22. I mean, isn't that a great date? As the date where the lights go dark on their 3G stuff. So there's a savings there because, you know, when they hold those older technologies forward, I remember being at a hotel where Alcatel-Lucent was holding this amazing party because Verizon had decided to leave its 2G network on longer, and they were able to sell a whole lot more infrastructure. They threw a party for their people because of it. So you're right. I mean, those costs are ridiculous, and I think they're going to shed some of that stuff.
Wow.
The other thing that I think happens, you remember the early days of cellular when we were growing at like 70, 75% a month, you know, years ago. And you remember there weren't, now we have very sophisticated roaming agreements, but remember it was this incredible quilt with thousands of pieces to have coverage where you would even check to see if your carrier had a roaming agreement with the town like 2 hours away to make sure you didn't get charged like a couple bucks a minute. And what I also suspect that because of so much expense deploying 5G, you're pulling fiber everywhere to get the bandwidth and to get the latency. Are we going to see lots of opportunities for sort of these very, I wouldn't say socially sourced networks, but just lots of people contributing and working together where you have, it would appears to be consistent coverage, but multiple people are thrown in the pot to provide that coverage.
Can we talk use cases? I know, James, I think you started to talk about different ways that these are being used. So what kind of enterprise need are they, do you see specifically being supported by 5G?
Well, I think 5G is going to have less latency, more bandwidth, right, and more reliability. Those three things. So I actually see some cord cutting going on where we've had cord cutting for TV stuff from homeowners, right? But businesses especially are gonna be rolling out where they're 5G primary, not wired connection primary for what they're doing. There's going to be enough bandwidth there. That's one. There are so many different unique use cases. I spend most of my day in the weeds in IoT, right? The Internet of Things. So I think about connected factory floor, the supply chain issues that are out there. I see that I see a really, really cool 5G chip coming that is battery powered, that's a printed circuit, right? It's printed, it's ink, not you know, and we're looking at, you know, sub $20 devices out there for asset tracking for the first time ever. So they almost become disposable. You know, there's a ton. Robotics, holographics, because of the amount of bandwidth that's pushed through. Alan?
Yeah, I'm in the middle of one of the largest private 5G deployments in the US this year, which is with the Department of Defense and a bunch of other stuff. And I actually see sort of the AR, VR stuff. The DoD just announced they're spending $22 billion on HoloLenses with Microsoft for AR applications for their IVAS system. So these things really, you need the massive benefits that 5G provides. I mean, it should have been called like the 5G impetus purchase because, you know, it's just one piece of the puzzle. And so I'm in the middle of quite a few different AR, more AR than VR, but both. Everything from efficiency in warehouses to field applications where you can put 5G networks like on a flight line for maintenance and in factories. Some of the applications in telemedicine that are coming up, where you have some really interesting things that are on the leading edge. And then when you can, and the interesting thing is the people doing telemedicine sort of, they know about 5G coming, but they really haven't internalized, in my opinion, what it really means for them, or how do you even play with that? And the people doing 5G are sort of looking for the applications to help justify the network investment. And there's a lot of opportunity intersection when you have those kind of parties of, you know, how do you make both things better by working together? And I think we'll see quite a bit in telemedicine and telementoring over the next year or two.
So I wonder, James, you were talking about, you know, this concept of cord cutting. You know, is that potentially being accelerated by this remote working environment that so many people have jumped to? They've kind of hit their limits on their wired connections.
Yeah, absolutely. And John, you're in Iowa, right? I grew up in Iowa. There is a broadband divide across the nation, the haves and the have-nots. You know, and you know,
I
talking
was not in Iowa when the 5G icon popped up on my phone. I will say that.
but one of the really interesting things that I think we can see out there is T-Mobile's network. They do a really balanced, I call it a layered cake. I think they call it that as well, approach, where they have low, medium, and high spectrum availability. So, you know, they're able to cover massive sections of the country with faster, right, cellular service. Just it's not going to be blazing, right? It's not going to be the stuff that we're seeing in factories or private stuff, but it's fast enough to solve some of the broadband dilemma out there as well. And I think that is necessary. Absolutely.
And then add in 100 billion that's currently as part of that proposed bill in Congress just for rural broadband expansion, and that's on top of the other couple things that have come out for funding. I think 5G provides probably the best opportunity in a generation to connect people up with high-speed connectivity, and I think some form of that I think has a very good chance of getting through, simply because it's the very definition of infrastructure. You see those surveys of what people could live without, and they can live without a lot of things, but they can't live without their high-speed connectivity. And to your point, James, about the cord cutting, you know, having a 22 and a 24-year-old, I can tell you that they will never have a conventional cable service. They will never have a conventional phone line. They make sure their phone stays current, and they got a lot of charging cords. Because I always say the other opportunity to invest in 5G in the short term is actually external batteries for your phone.
There you go. Okay. So then in this scenario, who are the big winners and who are the losers? Is this all going to be Verizon and AT&T, you know, making out on this, or the vendors, or the people who are making the devices that are attached to the edge of the network for IoT, or who's going to really benefit? Alan?
Well, first of all, I think the whole principle behind a lot of what's going on with Open RAN is by sort of disconnecting the network software from the network hardware is to create a much bigger ecosystem of providers where you don't have that lock-in. And so, you know, it's early days, but I think long-term, the people that can help enable choice on the vendor side, I think are going to do well. I'm personally seeing all the traditional operators will be very busy with this, but I am seeing anybody in the RAN ecosystem and the core ecosystem to deploying a network are overwhelmed right now. If you're a school district trying to connect up some poor kids who don't have connectivity, get in line to get your you know, CBRS deployment, even if you have fiber to your schools. I think long term, though, just like I would say in general in IoT, the big winners are people that can offer integrated solutions that are optimized for the network features, that you're really providing incredible value. Like one of my partners for an upcoming telemedicine project, you know, has this incredible tool where you can just have the people do their regular job, capture it with the tool, and then enable it as in an AR environment using a 5G network. And that the Capstone is taking in some places. And, you know, things like that, people who can provide very specific value to leverage those features that impact the company's operations, I think are going to do very well.
Sounds good. James? Thoughts?
So, the winners, us, sitting here, right? It's all of us across the country. We're the real winners of this thing. If I think about who the business winners are, I think maybe some of the tower companies that also have invested into fiber, right? Alan talked about the RAN ecosystem, right? Who's the basis of the RAN ecosystem, radio access network ecosystem? It's the towers, and it's the REITs that are putting up small cells on buildings to be able to do some of this. I think the NEMs are going to do fine, right? Nokia and Ericsson and guys like that are going to be fine. There are going to be some small guys that get purchased by the big guys, just like we've seen in past generations. We saw it in 3G. We saw it in 4G. We'll see it in 5G, where somebody will come up with something really good from an OSS, BSS operational standpoint that Ericsson or Nokia don't have to be able to manage this stuff better, because that's a gaping hole. But, you know, I when I read that question or thought process ahead of time, I was thinking about this. I wish Steve Jobs were here right now, right? Because he's the guy that comes up, here's a guy that comes up with really unique ideas to change the world and change the dynamic. The winners are going to be the crazy ones, right? That famous statement that he made, here are the crazy ones, right? Here are to the thinkers, the makers, the people that think outside the box, that are doing. I don't know that we know who the real winner is going to be. We're going to see billionaires come out of this that we don't even know where they come from, because they've come up with something quite new.
Yeah.
And I think, at some point we're seeing a separation of winners in the hardware infrastructure side and then winners on the application side. And I think that's where you're headed is the creative thinkers don't have to build the infrastructure to make their idea work. They can just come up with the idea, and it's in that application world, knowing they've got a reliable transport that makes it all fit together or work or deliver whatever their unique idea is. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. In fact, for some of the projects I'm in the early stage of, we're looking at how do you actually put a 5G node in your software partner's office development center, because it's hard to develop on 5G if you don't have access to the network, especially a private network. And especially when you talked about mobile edge computing and things like that, you really want the real experience. But today's technology actually allows us to do that. We can put the core 1,000 miles away, and it's just amazing what you can do out there.
One thing that we didn't talk about, Alan, and you and I have talked about this in the past, some of the winners are going to be the data guys, right?
Huge.
Right? The Microsoft, Azure, AWS, Google. There's going to be so much data flowing at them through these big pipes. They're not going to know what to do with it.
Yeah, and they have to store it all because you don't know what's valuable to you right away. So what you're going to have to do is you gotta store it like a chipmunk in the fall, and hopefully in a year or two, as the bucket fills up, you just keep buying more buckets, and then hopefully your data scientists figure out what's valuable and what's not long term. I mean, that's really the joy of what's going on in some of the edge compute, and that it does an initial filter where, like, if you're on a polling machine, it doesn't send all the same data all the time. It does some intelligence. I mean, but that's where I think the mobile edge computing benefits, and that's where I think people are getting smart, because you don't get the latency that's promised if everything goes back to the core, to the cloud. You have to really think about what functions you can keep on the edge to take advantage of the latency aspects fully of this technology.
Okay, well, that leads us to speaking about the future. Some technology providers are already floating ideas about rolling out 6G. So considering that we're still rolling out 5G, does that make sense? Is that something we need to be preparing for now?
Well, I'd like to announce I'm starting the 17G conference next month, just to get ahead of the curve.
Sounds good.
So I was fortunate in a prior role. I got to work with some of the smartest standards people in the world who worked on these standards many, many years in advance of them going out. And frankly, being involved in some of the earliest 5G deployments right now, people are still trying to figure out how to make this work, how to fully see what's going to happen with these 16 and 17. I think people who try to talk to you about 6G, it's not that people aren't working on it, but it is so obscenely early. I think unless you're in standards or something like that, you should be worrying about getting 5G working right now. And maybe it's just a practical operational business guy in me, but there's so much to do on 5G. 6G would be great when it gets here, but that's not really in my thinking day to day at this point.
I agree wholeheartedly. And quite frankly, there are a few things that never got finished in 4G. So we'd be talking about 6? Hell no.
Yeah. What's the IT definition of 4G, by the way? 100 megabit speed? That people kept, we have to separate the standard activity from the marketing activity. Yeah. And I won't even go into the 5G on my phone in the past year. I'll get in trouble.
John, any thoughts from you on that?
I think they've covered it pretty well there.
Okay. Well, I think that's a good place to wrap up this edition of the Parallel Universe. So I'd like to very much thank our guests, Alan Proithis and James Brehm. Alan, did you want to let us know where the audience can get in touch with you?
Sure thing. If we ever get together at a conference again, that's always nice. But in the meantime, you can reach me on my website at capstonepartnersinc.com, and you can always reach me on LinkedIn as well.
Okay, James, how can we get in touch with you?
Same thing. Hopefully we'll cross paths at an event, but quite frankly, the website's the way to do it right now. We've got content on LinkedIn from my organization. It's not just me. I have got a lot better, smarter people that just support me. jbrem.com is the website. We've got a recurring newsletter that goes out. You can sign up for, and just Google us.
Okay, terrific. Well, thanks again so much. And you can reach us at Parallel, www.parallelpr.com. And on behalf of Parallel Communications, myself and John Stafford, thanks very much for joining us, and good afternoon.